Hello and welcome to episode 114 of our Industry Insights. We're going on almost 3 years of coming at you, and today we've got a special guest who's no stranger to the live stream. Michael's been on a couple of times, but we'd like to have Michael come in and riff with us about Kubernetes and really cloud native in general. Since Michael's last been on the show, he's actually received a promotion to Field Chief Technology Officer for Cloud Native in the office of the CTO here at Veeam Software. Michael, welcome back.
Yeah, hey, Dave.
I know you're getting ready to, speaking of Cloud Native, you're getting ready to go to Florida for an event here in short order. So we're really very happy we were able to get a hold of you. For those that may not be familiar with you, love to have everyone understand a little bit more about you. I've prepared or actually stolen a intro slide from you that we can go ahead and present up here. So Field CTO, I put your nickname in there, Cadezilla, but that's really derived off of your blog, Vzilla. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what the QR code is.
Yeah, well, first off, it's probably worth going, like, the Vzilla is a nod to that I've been blogging around virtualization for the last 15 years, around the trials and tribulations of virtualization that I'm sure most of the listeners, watchers are familiar with. And then a couple of years ago, I got parachuted into the Kasten business unit to focus on, or to learn, the ropes around cloud native, and in particular around Kubernetes, data within Kubernetes, and protecting those workloads, as well as understanding a bit more about the open source world. The QR code there is a nod to a project that I started last year called 90 Days of DevOps. I know we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail shortly, but this is kind of so over the last 2 years, or at least the last 18 months, where I was starting to get into this new world, this exploring the world of automation, there was a lot of gaps. There was a lot of gaps around the processes and principles of DevOps itself. So in that true blog community fashion, I wanted to learn in public and also be quite vulnerable about learning in public. So I put together a GitHub repo, basically eating my own dog food, and put everything out there in the form of a blog, but also getting some hands-on as well. And then in doing so, I kind of got invited to a couple of ambassador programs, one around HashiCorp, very well known in that DevOps space, Eddie Hub around open source, and then Open UK became an ambassador. And then just recently on the New Year's Eve or New Year's Day honors list for Open UK, I was an honorary attendee, or an honorary mention on there as well. So that's a very quick intro into me.
Outstanding. I know you've got something like 15 and almost 15,500 followers on Twitter. You've been in the virtualization space a long time. That's why I think you're uniquely qualified to be able to double click again with us around Kubernetes in 2023, because you've lived both worlds. You know, obviously steeped into the traditional world, into the hypervisor-based world, but now going multiple years into cloud native world. And I kind of want to just tee up a little bit. You mentioned 90 Days of DevOps in the program that it is, but for those of us that aren't necessarily steeped in this space, or at least not yet, it can be a little overwhelming because there's a lot of different pieces. Cloud native means different things potentially to different people. I wonder if you could break this down a little bit for us.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found that you're always going to be learning. If you want to learn, there's no one book or no one YouTube video that you can go and learn DevOps. The way I did it is kind of, if you look at just all these logos on the page and you put them all together, it starts to become looking very overwhelming. And I think we all look at that, right? When we have to learn something new, the mountain looks bigger, a lot bigger than it maybe is. So in order for me to break this down, I decided, right, okay, we've got programming languages, we've got Linux, we've got networking, and just basically went round and put them into this mind map type approach. And then I went, okay, like where are we right now? So from a Linux point of view, I've been working with Linux for the last 15 years on and off, but probably not on a daily basis. So we could put half a tick in that one. We know enough about that to be dangerous. Things like networking, infrastructure as code, Docker. I'd done bits with a lot of these areas, so they were very much maybe a little bit more than foundational in terms of what I already knew. And obviously, storing and protecting data. I've been at Veeam just coming up 8 years. I hope I know a little bit about how to store and protect that data. But really, the fundamental part was starting with, well, what is and why do we use DevOps? And that went through the first opening 6 days of the 90 days. I actually ran this on a daily basis from January the 1st through to the 31st of March, which just coincidentally happens to be 90 days and the first 3 months of the year, but consistently writing those blog posts out for each of those days and going through these areas. Now, do you need to do these? Do you need to learn a programming language? Well, maybe not. And that's why they're in 7-day type chunks. So you can pick and choose as to what you do. But the whole idea, well, to be honest, when it first started, it was me just learning in public. It was just me putting down my notes after watching much smarter people than me on YouTube and other free accessible content, and me putting my notes down and coming up with little ideas, little practical hands-on scenarios to build out a programming a program that would tweet something about how many days I had left or something along them lines. And it just so happened that, well, over the last 12 months, it's grown to over 20,000 GitHub stars, which I like that to, or liken that to like a like or a favorite. It just shows that people are hopefully finding it useful. Where it gets really interesting from this point of view is like it's had, I think, just 5,000 forks. It's had 80 contributors, which means people have gone in and corrected my spelling and grammar mistakes, but they've also contributed additional tasks and additional practical. So I find that amazing. And then it's been translated 7 or 8 times into different languages. So I didn't know it, but I was writing basically a free training resource for the world, because DevOps is pretty hot, it seems, at the moment. But it's about the principles and the processes, not necessarily around the tools that you see around here. It's about how do we automate everything? How do we automate all the things to make our life easier so that we can concentrate on the more important parts of our environment and our infrastructure? One of the key areas, obviously, for the last 2 years for me has been around Kubernetes and containerization. And I know a lot of you are focused on virtualization, or at least virtualization, cloud, and then maybe getting into this cloud native space. The best way I've found to describe what is Kubernetes is, one, Kubernetes is not just a developer platform. So don't think that, oh, I don't need to know that because my developers are using it, I don't need to know it. If your developers are developing on Kubernetes, you as a platform engineering, systems administrator, DevOps engineer, cloud engineer, you need to also have a good fundamental understanding of that. And just think about Kubernetes as just another platform. It's just like virtualization is, VMware is for virtualization and virtual machines. It's just like the cloud is, AWS is for cloud computing. Kubernetes is an orchestration engine for containers. Very, very similar to what we see within VMware and virtualization.
And I love that. And if you start on January 1st, 90 days later, you end up on World Backup Day, the end of March 31st. And also, Michael's contributing to the sticker game. Let's see if I can get it into focus. Not quite. Actually, it barely got in there. But 90 days of DevOps logo on my Lenovo laptop. Actually, on one of the back of my all black Van Halen guitars as well. So thanks for contributing to the sticker verse as well. So a couple things here, great setup, a lot to learn, but to your point, you can do this in bite-sized chunks. There are resources out there, not the least of which is what you put together. But there's also things like CNCF, meaning Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and a premier show in this space called KubeCon. Before we riff on various kind of numbers and survey responses from that, tell us a little bit about KubeCon and CNCF overall.
So yeah, my first KubeCon is very similar to what we have like with VMware Explore or AWS reInvent, but it's obviously focused a lot around open source technologies, but also around cloud native. It's also called Cloud Native Con and KubeCon in one same venue. And I think so. My first one was during the pandemic. It was the EU version in 2021 that was all virtual. So you didn't really get to interact with people so much other than through chat. So you didn't really get to understand the backgrounds and everything around them. Then fast forward to 2022 in October, 2021 in October. Again, it was in North America. I didn't get to go because I weren't allowed to travel because of the COVID restrictions. Then we get round to 2022 of the May, and it's the same time as Veeam On. So I was at Veeam On talking all things Kubernetes at Veeam On, whilst Valencia had KubeCon. And then finally, last year in October, I had the ability to attend KubeCon in Detroit. However, obviously, I've spoke to a lot of people since then, and that trend between it being a very developer-focused centric conference, maybe in that 2021 and pre-pandemic, has evolved massively in that we're now seeing systems administrators and infrastructure admins, platform engineers attend KubeCon and are asking those questions around what about data, what about reliability, what about resilience, and all of the things that we know from an architecture point of view that come up from our side and potentially don't cross the minds of developers so much, I think is a fair way of putting it. So the evolution has started very much so in that platform systems administrators are having to have an understanding around cloud native in general. And I would say from a Kubernetes point of view, we're where it's just one of the cogs within the cloud native landscape.
Interesting. Great stuff. So what I thought I would do is rapid fire to some degree, a little bit of research here. So I'm going to kind of juxtapose CNCF, or Cloud Native Computing Foundation, is very much associated with KubeCon, the event that you were describing. Yeah. And the reason I thought I would do this is I would take some data from that venue, which is certainly people that are very interested in or already, to some degree or another, practitioners in the cloud native world. So, it's sort of like going to a car enthusiast show. You could pretty high likelihood that you're going to find people that are interested in cars, right? So it's people that have a vested interest in this. And let's kind of go back and forth between that and then what we've uncovered in our data protection trends research for 2023, industry's largest ever independent research, 4,200 possible respondents. We asked some containers and Kubernetes questions. Here I thought it was interesting, the most recent 2022 survey, simple question there, how are you using containers in your organization? This is a group that's very, very interested or interested, pro containers, they live this space, shift left, whatnot. 44% saying they use for most or even all of their production applications. It drifts down to a little over a third, 35% saying, well, we use them for a few production applications, and about 9% saying they're piloting or actively evaluating containers for production. Before we get to the data protection trends data, which really goes out to more of I'll call it the traditional infrastructure operations teams, the traditional backup teams, how does this data resonate with what you've seen over the last year or so? Does any of this surprise you, or does it seem about right on track?
Yeah, no, this does for me is like it identifies that there's that trend towards. I would love for the CNCF to do a comparison year on year and see what that growth looked like last year, very much like you guys do from a data protection report, is that I would like to see what was that number last year on the CNCF. So 44%, okay, nearly half of the people are already running production workloads within Kubernetes or containers within their organization. And obviously you can see even at the bottom end, the piloting or actively, they're still pursuing, they're looking at how that looks. So this is happening. And like you said, Dave, yeah, absolutely. these are the prime targets. These are the ones that are walking through the door, invested in themselves, or the companies investing in them to be at KubeCon. So you'd expect the numbers to be a little bit skewed in terms of that. But yeah, it's still relevant information, and it is growing year on year.
So everyone remember that 9%, meaning piloting or actively evaluating. Again, this is a cloud native fan club, if you will. This is that kind of an event. It's like going to VMware Explore. You're going to meet vSphere and VMware related interested administrators. Here, data from a little over 2,000, almost 2,100 organizations. We asked a simple question that's very similar. How would you describe your organization's adoption of containers? Again, this goes out to predominantly the traditional infrastructure operations teams, the traditional Veeam backup and replication administrators. Shockingly, only 1% said we do not plan to run containers at all. Jason Buffington and I have sometimes joked, well, 1% of 2,100 maybe are mistaken. Time will ultimately tell. But compared to what we saw in the previous slide, 8% said not yet in deployment, but we're actively interested. I'll jump over the 40% just to hit the other one. The predominant response, Michael, was 52% said we run containers in production. Now, it doesn't mean they run 100% of their activity in production, but they have at least one application, one solution running in production. And then the remaining 40% said we're not yet in production, but we're planning for deployments. So I sometimes use this as a proof point, and as we did last year, these numbers are slightly higher because we asked the exact same question in 2022 to tell people on the heritage infrastructure operations teams, containers aren't coming. Containers have come, and what's most likely is that they're going to be deployed even further in the coming year or years.
Yeah, so I think there's a broader. I will be involved in asking the question or prolonging the question next year. But that running the container, think about like running a virtual machine on an ESXi host. You can do that, and that might be what some of these are doing. Now, add in your virtual center and multiple ESXi nodes. Now you've got an orchestration engine. How we can scale up, scale down, vertically, horizontally. I feel like that's the next stage of understanding what these 2,000 again. Quote the traditional sysadmin, they're running these workloads in production. So something is running a mission critical, business critical application within the environment.
What I think is interesting, and I'll zip through next two data points just to show that it doesn't materially change by size of company. So from our data protection trends data, this exact same 2,096 respondents, we just broke it out on the right-hand side by size of company. So there we go from less than 250 employees on the left bar. The middle bar is 250 to just under 1,000 employees. And the right bar stack is 1,000 employees and above. The green at the bottom is those that are already running in production. And Michael, I don't think it's a surprise that large organizations have a higher percentage of container deployment in production. But I love this slide to myth bust that containers clearly aren't just a big enterprise play.
Yeah, exactly. So I think in the Kubernetes world, I think there's always that talk track about, it's an enterprise play. It has to be, you have to be in the Fortune 500 you have to be a Netflix or an Uber to be running Kubernetes. Clearly, like this stamp of data shows that actually no, SMBs are just as capable of running Kubernetes, and same for that mid-market commercial sector.
Yeah, here's the Cloud Native Computing Foundation survey response. They broke it down instead of 3 by 5, meaning they took the large enterprise and broke it into 1,000 to sub 5,000 and 5,000 and above. Slightly different orientation here, meaning these colors, the dark purple is private cloud, the kind of lighter purple is public cloud only. I'm sorry, I should have said private cloud only in that dark purple. The lighter purple is public cloud only. The lighter pink, multi-cloud but not hybrid. And then that darker pink, where for many of the bands, is the largest deployment, is hybrid cloud. So now we break this across the 4 different company size or segments. Similar kind of takeaway here in my mind, Michael, is this like Jason and I like to say, the cloud isn't one thing. Kubernetes or containers aren't just one thing in terms of how it's deployed, except for the very small. The most common deployment model, at least at this point, is hybrid cloud. And just, we oftentimes try to be very neutral, but if we just step aside for a moment, Kasten by K10 by Veeam, we see deployments in multiple different ways, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't really care. I shouldn't probably say that, but it doesn't really matter from a Kubernetes distribution, whether it's OpenShift, whether it's EKS on AWS, whether it's on-prem using SUSE Rancher or OpenShift there as well. It generally doesn't matter to us, and we're definitely seeing all scopes of the employees' numbers there seen within our customer base.
Perfect. So let's bring it closer to home, meaning we're backup people, we're a backup organization, and a lot of our audience, of course, are either backup administrators or partners, resellers in the backup world. Going to toggle back to our data protection trends data. We asked 2 different questions. First one that we're exposing here is who in the organization is responsible for defining the data protection requirements within your organization's containerized applications. What I think is interesting is essentially the top half is almost evenly split between infrastructure teams, either the storage admins in the upper left at 26%, the backup teams in the upper right at 23%. So collectively, that's literally almost half at 49%. The bottom half is more of the applications teams, meaning the Kubernetes administrators, a perfect 25%, almost exactly a quarter, application admins at 26%. The reason I think this is interesting, Michael, is on the one hand, you could take away from this, it's somewhat early days as it relates to backup, Kubernetes and containers. So there's today multiple different roles involved. It harkens back a little bit to sort of vSphere, pick your time frame, 2007 or 2008 or 9, when vSphere really started to go into production. But what are your thoughts? Any surprises on this one?
No, other than so in terms of admin is used in three of those categories, right? So I think the data responsibility lies, and I think I've mentioned far too many titles that it could be out there as well, like DevOps engineer, cloud engineer, platform engineering. I feel like maybe over the next year or so, we're going to maybe even consolidate some of these names as to who has the responsibility of the data as well. But yeah, I think generally speaking, and whether you're speaking to storage admins, the backup team itself, and I would expect that the backup team itself would be more along the enterprise route, whereas as you get closer to commercial and SMB, you've probably got more generic systems administrators that are looking after literally everything, not just backup. But yeah, so I think it's interesting to see the breakdown of these positions.
Let's now go to a slightly different question. So the left-hand side is saying who's responsible for defining protection requirements for containers, Kubernetes. The right-hand side that we just exposed is how. How are the organizations primarily backing up containers? Sometimes I like to start at the extremes, meaning the edge conditions. 1% said the containers are natively durable, so backup isn't necessary. To me, that's a little bit like our conversations around SaaS, Microsoft 365, now Salesforce.com. And we do a little bit of evangelical work to help people understand that may not be the case, particularly, and here's where I'd love to get your comment if I move just to the right or clockwise on that. 4% said there's no stateful data, so we don't need to back up our containers. I think it was popular, certainly a couple years ago, to believe that containers are going to have a half-life measured in seconds, maybe small number of minutes. So transitory, there's nothing in there. If I just pause on that, What's your typical viewpoint when you see containers deployed in production? Is there stateful data?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can just look back at the last year's Kubernetes releases. Everyone has had a handful of major storage enhancements that enable you to run data services within Kubernetes. And I would argue that the 4% there, the question I'd like to ask them is, okay, so what do you do about the login? What do you do about the metrics? That data, is it important? Like, do you need it? But also, what's the application doing? What is it, a static website? And in which case, I would kind of back them, as in like, agree with them on that point. But if their application has any form of database, whether it's running on RDS or Cloud SQL within Google, then it needs protecting. Maybe not the container, but the database definitely does. And I'd like to protect it as part of the whole application versus just go after RDS or just after Cloud SQL. So I think it depends. But equally, I love that it's such a short number as well. So
yeah. And I like what you said, that tees up the next couple of responses nicely. Meaning you mentioned, like, depending on how the application's laid out, just going getting the app data may not be enough. So 47% said, oh, we're going to back up the bits, meaning the storage. That may not get you everything you need. Or if it does, that may be crash consistent. That may get you part of an application, not necessarily an end-to-end business process, would be my thought on that. And then 22% said, well, we'll just go get the database components. But either one of those, and feel free to correct me because you're more expert in this than I am, just backing up storage, meaning bits, and hopefully they're all the bits, but maybe it's just partial, or just backing up a database component. In my mind, if I think about it in the traditional world, meaning outside of cloud native, that doesn't get you up and running necessarily, or at least you've got to do some extra work after that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's the same with the virtual machine. You can back up the database, but you're still going to have to rebuild the operating system, the virtual machine that holds that database. So yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the same constraints that we have in the cloud native world to what we've seen in cloud and virtualization.
Right. As we begin to wind down, I was happy to see that 26%, a little over a quarter, said we're using a third-party tool for containers so we can get all of this information collected. I expect to see that rise. It certainly did rise year over year in our data protection trends survey, but that's the model that we would certainly put forth for organizations running complex applications. I want to give a shout out as well as a thanks to Michael for joining us yet again, and a shout out. Click this QR code or just search on 90 Days of DevOps to learn more about this space. You've also got some excellent education resource that you can go and use if you want to make the point that if you're an infrastructure person thinking containers are coming, hopefully now this has shown containers are happening, maybe at a faster rate than what you thought, but it's certainly not too late to jump in there. Great resource right here. And then speaking of resources, Veeam, we do a lot of industry independent research. This is not a Veeam commercial. These aren't just Veeam customers by any stretch. In fact, Veeam customers typically are 10% or less of the sample size. We've got 1,000 organizations that did get hit with ransomware and the trends that they learned from that in the ransomware trends report, 1,700 organizations from our cloud protection trends report, whether that's infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. We released a Salesforce product at Veeam. We wanted to go understand that persona a little better. So we polled 800 organizations that manage their Salesforce.com across the globe. All of these are global, by the way. They're not just one geography. And of course, this is our flagship research that we've been drawing data off of, data protection trends, 4,200 unbiased organizations, 28 countries, the largest report of its size. Michael, always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thanks, Michael, for jumping back in. We like to have him on a regular basis. Everyone out there, stay safe, stay positive. We'll see you next week after we launch Veeam Backup Replication version 12 and a lot of its associated components. Jason and I will be riffing on what that means, as well as bringing in some additional data protection trends research to discuss. Until then, thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
In 2023, innovation fueled every industry, from renewable energy to space travel, all powered by data. The world runs on data. It's worth more than oil, and inherent value brings inherent risk. Natural disasters, accidents, and ransomware attacks are increasingly prevalent. Years of globally impactful work can be erased in an instant. But not with us. With Veeam, your enterprise becomes radically resilient. We give you the power to restore any workload, anywhere, anytime, instantly, so you can meet every challenge head-on. There's a reason over 80% of Fortune 500 companies work with us. We provide comprehensive recovery with tailored solutions that scale with you. When you partner with a global leader in data protection and ransomware recovery, you can bounce forward. Veeam. Radical resilience starts here.